Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brittnee. This video is part 2 of my chocolate molding process. If you haven't had the chance to watch part 1 yet, I recommend you do that first. You can check out that video in this card or down in the description. I've created a nice PDF of my full process, highlighting the crucial points that you want to be aware of at each step. This is something that is really useful to have printed out to glance at or to even review before you start a chocolate project to make sure that you give yourself enough time and also that you remember all those key details in each step that you might forget as soon as you get your hands covered in chocolate. So I've added the PDF to my new shop tab on my website. My plan is to start adding small projects here and there to generate a little bit of extra income to help me keep the channel running. Don't worry, I'll still be offering some downloads for free, but some will be for purchase as a way for you guys to support me and the channel. This is my first time doing this, so I want to reward those of you who always pop right on and watch my video right away. So for the first 3 days, my full chocolate molding process will be just $7, which is about as cheap as an oat milk latte from your favorite coffee shop, except a lot longer lasting. And after that, the price will bump up to $15. So be sure if you're interested to buy it within the first 3 days. I worked really hard on this guide to make it easy to read and really fun to look at. I tried to add a little bit of personality to it and also design it in a way that highlights steps so that you can just glance at it and find the information that you're looking for right away. And it is packed full of all the information that I covered in the last video and will cover in this video, plus a couple extra things that I forgot to say in these videos. And all of these points and tips are things that I have learned over the course of many years and put together in this guide myself so that you guys don't have to do as much trial and error. You can just follow my recommendations. So if you'd like to support me and buy a copy, you can find the link in this card or down in the description. All right, let's move back into my chocolate molding steps. So we are on step 5, shell your chocolates. So whether you're skipping decoration and jumping right into shelling your chocolates, or you've decorated your mold with luster dust or colored cocoa butter, the advice is the same. Don't chill your mold and don't warm your mold up here before you shell. There is no need to. If your room is in the right temperature range, then your mold will already be at a nice, cool working temperature. Before molding, you'll want to prepare a nice, large working area and then maybe get your working space set up. Be sure to sanitize your countertops. I like to lay down a piece of parchment or two, and then I like to have my chocolate scrapers at the ready. I just set them right down next to my parchment paper. If you like to fill your molds using a piping bag, have that ready. I also like to have, this has become my piping bag cup. I like to prepare this in advance so that it's ready for when my chocolate is tempered. This just helps pour your chocolate into the piping bag. If you're using a warming tank, you really don't need to prepare too much of an extra working space. You can just push all your extra chocolate back into the warming tank. You can also do that into the bowl you're tempering. I like to just do it over a piece of parchment because I find it easier than trying to aim it back into the bowl. If I'm using a warming tank, I'll put the extra into the warming tank. So you'll just take your tempered chocolate and your room temperature mold, and you'll put the chocolate in the mold however you want to with the piping bag, or you can use a ladle. I find the ladle hard to deal with, so if I'm not using a piping bag, I'm usually using like a half measuring cup. I just find it easier to hold. Scoop it in, pour it on, and if it's kind of messy, if you don't use a piping bag to keep the chocolate just in the cavities, it's nice to give it one first scrape into your tank, bowl, or onto your parchment. And then you're going to shake the mold so that all the air bubbles come up to the surface and not get stuck in the bottom and ruin your design, especially in a mold like this with corners. corners can trap little air bubbles. So you're going to knock all the air out by shaking the mold. I like to do this by tapping it back and forth like this. It's really loud against the countertop, the edge of the countertop. I just hold it and I tap it. You've seen me do it if you've watched my videos. Or you can use your chocolate, the end of your chocolate scraper to tap it like this. I usually do both. I usually first tap it on my counter like this, and I switch ways. And then right before I dump it, I also go along with my chocolate scraper. That's just kind of like the pattern that I do. You can do that, or you can just stick to one. You'll stop hitting it or tapping it when you stop to see air bubbles, or just do it for, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, and you should be good. Once you're done getting the air bubbles out, you're just going to tip the mold upside down. You're going to hold it as level as you can. And you also want to hold it on these little bars on the back. You want to avoid ever like holding your fingers against the outside of the cavity, because the warmth from your fingers can actually mess with the temper of the shell. So avoid doing that. So you're going to hold these little grip bars. And again, you're going to tap the mold on the edge with your scraper, and your chocolate will start pouring out. You're going to do this for a while until you, not a while, but like, I don't know, 10 seconds or less. You'll see the chocolate pouring out. As it starts to slow down, you'll see the dripping is slowing down. You're going to scrape it first upside down, keeping it level with your scraper like this, and then turn it over. Once you turn it over, you can get a better view of how thick your shells are. If you can see that it's like kind of globbing up and it looks pretty thick, you can knock more out, or if you think your shells are too thick, go ahead and knock more out. If not, the next thing to do is make sure all the flat surface area around the cavities is clean, and that every edge has a clean edge. You don't want chocolate overhanging, because then you won't get a clean shell. If your first scraper's dirty, I like to have like 3 scrapers on the counter at once, so that if one's dirty, I'm not like trying to set down my mold and then grabbing it and like trying to clean it off. I just grab a new one, scrape again. One more thing I wanted to talk about. How do you know how thick your shells are, and if they're a good thickness, if they're too thick or too thin? I would say my advice is just that it comes with practice. There are ways you can measure so that you're consistent every time. You can first weigh the mold, and then over time, you'll discover what thickness you like better by weigh the mold before you shell and weigh the mold after, and then you'll know how much chocolate you've added to it. Of course, it'll take you a couple times to become familiar with any given mold and then decide which thickness of shell you like, but I've never done that and I don't feel like I need to. If you work consistently and you're always working in the right room temperature and using the chocolate at the same working temperature, and you use like the same rhythm that you always do, like you always tap kind of for a certain amount of time and then tip for a certain amount of time, like just from the routine of making it, you'll be pretty consistent in your shells. That's what I've found. So that's kind of my own thing, but I would just say this is where practice comes in. The more you practice, the more you'll know what you like and yeah, how thick your shells are. So yeah, I just go by eye. If you're wondering, I would say I try to aim for like a little bit bigger than 1/16 of an inch, if I had to guess. Maybe I should measure one of these times and see how thick I actually make them. Once I have a clean scrape, I am going to set my mold to the side at room temperature, and I'm going to either set it up on its side like this on top of the counter, or I'm going to prop it up like this. You can use like 2 sheet trays or 2 other molds to hold it up off of the counter. You can also set it straight on top of like a cookie cooling sheet, just so that it has air flow around the full mold. You don't want to set this straight onto the counter and against the counter, because the warm chocolate will trap heat in, and it will affect the way that your chocolates cool and temper, and you could get like streaking. So you want to make sure there's cool air around all of the mold, and that will help your chocolate shells cool evenly and consistently. And then kind of for the same reason, I like to let my shells first set up at room temperature. This helps them cool more consistently and evenly, rather than popping them into somewhere cold and kind of like having a shock of temperature change. So I'm just letting it cool down consistently and not too rapidly by leaving it on the countertop at room temperature. You'll know when the shells are setting up because they will become dull. The chocolate's no longer shiny, and if you touch them, they're firm to the touch. And at that point, I pop the mold into my wine cooler. And the reason I use a wine cooler is because the regular fridge is too cold for this step. I do not want my chocolate to fully contract and pull away from the mold at this step. I just want the chocolate to crystallize. So a regular fridge is around like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 4 degrees Celsius. Wine coolers are a bit warmer than that. Mine can go down to 41 degrees and up to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has two sections, like an upper level and a lower level, that I can change to different temperatures. So I keep my upper section set at 54 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 12 degrees Celsius. And I keep my lower section set to 57 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 14 degrees Celsius. So my process is just that after shelling, I pop my molds into the lower level, which is the one that's set to 57 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't have to use this exact same temperature. For me, I've just found this is a good temperature setting for this step. You could go up to 60 degrees even. You just want it to be cool enough to ensure that the chocolate is crystallizing, but not too cold so that it pulls off the mold early. Now, if you don't have a wine cooler, you can still do this step, just do it at room temperature. Just leave the molds out at room temperature, but you'll want to keep your room temperature as cool as you can. So I would lower it to like the lower end of that range that I gave you, or even lower if it's possible. If not, that's okay. You can leave them around like 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this next part of this step is a recommendation that I'll admit I don't always obey, but I would say it is best practice. So if I'm making chocolates to sell or doing something a little more official, I'll usually make sure to do this step. If I'm just doing chocolates for a video, I usually just ignore this part because I don't think it's crucial, okay? And the step is that after you shell your chocolates, you should let the shells sit so they can fully crystallize overnight or around 18 to 20 hours. So even though it looks like your chocolate is setting up nicely and it seems tempered, it actually takes chocolate between like 18 and 20 hours to fully crystallize. So that's just something important to be aware of, so you can keep it in mind. If you have the time to kind of separate each step by day, maybe decorate on one day, shell on the next day, fill on one day, and then cap on the next day, that's usually a good time frame to follow. But if you're in more of a hurry, like I sometimes am, this is a step I feel like you can get away with cutting more than things we'll talk about upcoming. Anyway, the reason I say you can skip is because I've heard conflicting things from some of the teachers I've learned by and done courses with. Some say you can fill your chocolates right away, and some say to wait overnight. So it's up to you what you want to do. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Step 6, fill your chocolates. Like the decoration step, there are so many directions you can go here. There are endless flavors and fillings and filling combinations that you can use. Ganache, crunchy layers, caramels, marshmallows, creams, and more. We could also talk a little bit about shelf life here, but I'm not going to go too deep into that right now. All I'll say is that shelf life for each filling will be completely different. and it can't officially be measured unless you have the proper equipment to do so. And I don't ever want to give any dangerous shelf life recommendations. I know people ask me all the time, what's the shelf life of this recipe? And I'm like, I can't tell you officially. Yeah, because I don't have the proper testing equipment. Though I do hope to get an AW reader soon, so we'll see. After that, we can talk more about it. Anyway, some recipes are specifically formulated for longer shelf lives and other recipes aren't. There are certain ingredients that you can add into recipes that will help extend the shelf life of your filling. And like I said, this is something I'm interested in and currently learning more about. And so I'll continue to share the things that I'm learning on here in the future. So once I've made my filling, I make sure it's cooled to 28 degrees Celsius or 82 degrees Fahrenheit before I pipe it into my shells. That's a safe temperature that will make sure you don't add in fillings to your shells that are too warm and take your chocolate shell or cocoa butter out of temper and mess with the results. So my process here is usually that I will make the filling and then I'll add it into a piping bag, seal it up, and set it on the cool countertop to start cooling down to that 28 degrees. Sorry, I'm distracted. There's all these cute little birds out the window. They're like flying around. As my filling is on the countertop cooling, I'll grab all the molds that I'm wanting to fill with this filling out of my wine cooler and just line them up in a row on the countertop, ready to be filled. I don't need to pull them out any sooner than that because it's okay if they're still a little cool from the wine cooler while I'm filling them. It shouldn't make much of a difference. Once the filling is cooled to that 28 degrees, I go ahead and pipe the filling into the mold. And a couple things to think of here. Number one, try to pipe as clean as possible. This is usually pretty easy to do with something more fluid like ganache. Caramel can be a little trickier because it's kind of sticky, but sometimes the smaller the hole you cut, the easier this is, unless your filling's really thick, just that you have more control with a smaller hole. And if you just put it right along the edge that scoops up on your mold and kind of lay it against it, and then when you're moving to the next cavity, kind of do it quick. If you're doing caramel or something sticky, stop putting pressure on the piping bag. And as you do that, you kind of tap the surface to pull it off and then quickly move to the next one. If you do get any filling on the surface area outside of the cavity, I like to have just a mini offset spatula to wipe it, make sure it's really clean. And then the other thing to think about when filling is to leave enough room on the top for the bottom of the chocolate, of course. And I would say I like to match the same thickness of the rest of the shell. So I try to leave like probably above 1/16 of an inch. If you're doing layers, you'll want to make sure to let each layer set up before adding on the next layer. And depending on what type of layers you're doing, will determine how long you have to wait until adding the next layer. And after my chocolates are filled, I usually just pop them back into the wine cooler right away. This time I use the upper section, which is set to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little bit cooler. I want those fillings to get nice and set up. Like I mentioned before, these temperatures aren't so specific that you have to follow them exactly. I'll recommend that if you have a wine cooler, set it between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 12 to 16 degrees Celsius. This is just a good cool range that will assist your chocolate in crystallizing, your filling in setting up and staying cool without fully contracting the chocolates from the mold. And one more thing to mention at this step is there is no need to wrap your mold in plastic. You don't want any of the moisture or the warmth from the filling to create any trapped moisture or condensation. You can actually get condensation along the surface of the mold and along that shell edge, which can mess with capping later on, where you have like a little bit of moisture and it's not going to fully stick together and become one piece. Again, the best practice here is to let the shells with the filling sit for 18 to 20 hours or overnight. And that's because if it's ganache, you want that chocolate inside the recipe to be able to crystallize fully. The chocolate will also contract and get a little smaller within the shell. And for all other types of fillings as well, you want to give them enough time to settle. They'll shrink a little bit, and also sometimes there can be air bubbles. You want to give enough time to rise to the surface and exit out of the chocolate so that they're not trapped down inside when you cap. Yeah, so one of the main reasons you want them to settle is because if the chocolates are almost filled to that top and they don't have a little extra room to add chocolate to the top when you're shelling, when the top layer, the capping chocolate, contracts, it can actually like push down against the filling, and the filling will find a weak spot in the shell, and you can get leaks in your bonbon or cracking. So if ever you've wondered if that happens, it could be because you didn't let your filling sit, or also just because they were overfilled in the first place. I don't know, some of you might be familiar with cakes. After a while, I started kind of doing the same thing with cake fillings, letting them sit overnight in the fridge after I've stacked the cake and filled it, because everything settles over time and air usually comes out. Especially when you're covering a cake in fondant, you want to make sure the cake is very compact and all the air has left. Sometimes you can even poke holes in it to help it happen. Because otherwise you'll get air bubbles underneath your fondant even after you've laid it down. So I kind of relate it to that a little bit. It's kind of a similar idea. So once again, I've made molded chocolates from start to finish all in one day and didn't do this step and didn't have a problem, but that isn't to say that you won't or that I won't if I skip this step. I would definitely say that after the filling step is the most important time to let your bonbons sit overnight or for that 18 to 20 hours, because you really want to decrease as much risk as you can of cracking or air being trapped in order to extend shelf life, especially if you're selling them. Once again, if you don't have a wine cooler, you can leave these at room temperature to set up overnight. Again, you want it to be as low as possible. So at least at the lower end of the working temperature range, like 68 or lower if you can. But again, you don't want to put it in the regular fridge because it's too cold and it will contract the chocolates, and we don't want to pull that shell off of the mold before capping because it's going to leave gaps, okay? Step 7, cap or seal your chocolates. This is a little different than the last step because the first thing you want to do is pull all the molds out that you're capping. You want to allow them to have enough time to come to room temperature before you seal the chocolates. While my molds are warming up to room temperature, I repeat step 4 and temper some more chocolate. You can temper a bit less per mold at this step because it takes less to cap them than to shell them. But still make sure you temper enough chocolate for all the molds that you're doing. Once I'm through that tempering process, as my chocolate is finishing cooling down to working temperature, I set up my working station just like before. Again, I just lay down a couple pieces of parchment paper. I get my clean scrapers. I usually have like 3. I like to have also a mini metal scraper. I get my piping bag if I'm using a piping bag, or my measuring cup. If I'm using a measuring cup, I'll just have it like propped into my tempered chocolate bowl or warming tank. So anyway, I grab all the supplies that I think I'm going to need to make things quicker and easier while I've got my tempered chocolate, because you know, you kind of have to work quickly with tempered chocolate so it doesn't cool down too quick. I think I might have forgot to mention at any point in the video, I know I talked about this with the cocoa butter, but of course you can always keep your tempered chocolate workable, and there's a fuzz right here, it's bugging me. Keep it within working temperature range using your heat gun. So that's also very helpful to have around and plugged in at the ready at all times, basically at all times throughout this whole process. Now, before I put chocolate onto my filled bonbons, I gently warm up the surface of the chocolates with the heat gun. And this is just so that the chocolate we're adding can adhere to the chocolate and the filling that's already in here. It kind of glues them together. Them being glued together also connects the chocolate so that the whole bonbon can then contract as one piece of chocolate. Okay, and the reason I say warm this up gently is because, and I learned this the hard way, if you even do the tiniest bit too much of heat, you will melt the chocolate and it can run down in between the chocolate shell and the mold, and you'll actually get a mark of chocolate on the bottom edge of your bonbon. This happened to me a couple times in the beginning, and it's super annoying because it's just a small thing, but it still like is something noticeable that you feel like kind of ruins the look of the bonbon, especially if you've worked so hard on the design. Don't be scared, just be careful. I was scared for a while and I was like, I don't even want to do this step, but you'll be okay. Just do like one quick pass. At first when I was learning, I was kind of thinking, well, it needs to be like a tiny bit shiny, right? To like show that it's melted, but you don't really need to melt the chocolate that comes in contact with the new chocolate. You just need to warm it up a little bit more. So it's just like, this is enough. And you know, heat guns are a lot, so they're a lot hotter than you think. Just like quick back and forth, one time is enough. Don't go back and forth twice, and don't hold it too close. Like, I don't know, let's say 6 inches, slowly running down it, and you're good to go. So once you've gently warmed up the mold, you're going to add the new chocolate on. Either you can use the piping bag, a cup, or ladle. And then if you want to prevent chocolate from running over the mold and making a mess, you can do like kind of a gentle scrape of any extra chocolate. And then you are going to tap it again like this to make sure the chocolate settles down into any crevices there might be left from the filling, if there's any little bumps or anything like that. And also just to shake it down into the corner of the filling. And then also, again, release any air. So do that a bit, knock it on the side if you want. And then you're going to try to do this part in one clean scrape off. And then clean the edge of the mold. If you don't fully get it clean, like I said, I always like to have a couple scrapers at the ready. I'll grab a clean scraper and do it one more time. The quicker you work here, the better. You'll find that the caps start setting up a lot sooner and the chocolate gets thicker quicker, just because the fillings might be holding in a little bit of coolness still. You don't want to mess with it too much. Really, if you can do it in 1 or 2 scrapes, that's good. Otherwise, things start setting up and then you're actually just like dragging chocolate back and forth across the thing. Now, if you get almost a clean scrape and you have some over here, you can just take the mini offset and clean only the mold that needs to be, or you can do a scraper and just do like 1 row that's not clean or something. And then what you're looking for is the surface area. Like, it doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but what you do need is all the edges to be perfectly clean so that the bonbons release smoothly from the mold. Once again, I want my chocolate to cool evenly and consistently. So I'm going to first let it set up at room temperature. And because the surface all has airflow up here on the top, you can set it straight onto your counter facing up. So once you can see that top chocolate edge is no longer shiny and it's starting to set up, we need the help of the fridge to fully contract the chocolates from the mold so we can get them out. If you don't want to unmold them right away, I would suggest leaving them at room temperature until you want to unmold them, or store them in the wine cooler if you have one. I wouldn't store them in the regular fridge for more than the time you're going to help them contract from the mold, just because it's too cold and I always worry about condensation or cracking. So either let them sit at room temperature, and then when you're ready to get them out of the mold, put the whole mold into the regular fridge for about 20 minutes. Now, sometimes if I'm worried about moisture in my fridge or smells, not that the fridge smells bad, just that if there's other food in there, there might be smells in there. You don't want that transferring into your chocolate. So sometimes if my fridge isn't like empty with other food and like maybe there's something with more moisture in there, I will definitely wrap my whole mold in plastic wrap to protect the chocolates. So it's up to you depending on your specific fridge situation. Step 8, unmold your chocolates. Once the mold has been in the fridge for 20 minutes, if everything goes according to plan, your bonbons should be really easy to release from the mold. You can check that by pulling the mold out of the fridge, and you can check underneath. For some shapes, it does help to just do a quick creak back and forth like this to torque the mold. It helps them release even more if they didn't on their own. The difference is you'll see when you first decorate, the color, you can see it attached to the mold. After they've released from the mold and the chocolate has contracted off of the mold, they look cloudy. So like you can almost see the air between the chocolate shell just sitting there and the mold. So you'll see a difference. If you see that, that's a great sign. They're ready to pop out. If I'm not quite sure they're ready, or if I have trouble getting them out, I put them in the fridge for like maybe 10 more minutes and try again. Now, after trying different methods of unmolding, I've found my favorite one. At first, I was using an acrylic plate that was the same size, and I would put it on top and then flip it over onto it. But there wasn't enough momentum to really knock them out. And it also created a lot of static electricity. So I don't use that anymore. And then I used to just like kind of slam it straight down, but that also creates a lot of static electricity. So my new favorite is that I'll keep a finger on one edge, and when I flip it over to tap it, I'm only hitting this front corner to the table. So there's actually a gap between the counter and the mold's falling out, and so gravity also helps pull the chocolate down and onto the counter, because some molds really have a lot of static and they can keep your bonbon stuck in the mold. So anyway, that really helps. The one thing is you have to be careful with, once you knock it, allow them a couple seconds to kind of jostle out of there, because if you move too quickly, sometimes you can knock one and scrape the outer edge of the chocolate, which is sad, and ruin your design. Or you can actually smash them, which I've done. That's not the worst thing though, because then you can just eat it. Anyway, sometimes you have to do a couple taps to get out the stubborn bonbons, which is totally fine. Just be very careful and be sure to move to a separate area on the counter. Now, if you're having real problems because something just really didn't go right with your chocolates, my first recommendation would be to pop the mold into the freezer for like 20 minutes and see if that helps release the chocolates from the mold. Maybe you can salvage them. If something's really gone wrong, like your whole chocolate like wasn't tempered properly, most likely they'll stick into the mold, which really sucks also. You might have to use your heat gun to melt the chocolates out so that you can clean out the mold and just start over. But first I would try the freezer to get them out. If that doesn't work, last resort is you're gonna have to melt them out. And it's kind of messy to clean, but sometimes that's what you've got to do. Step 9, store and package your chocolates. This is our last step. So after unmolding, the first thing that I usually do is load my beautiful new bonbons onto a quarter sheet tray. I just lay down a quarter sheet parchment paper. I stack my little bonbons there, and I love these lids that I have that go with these to protect my new bonbons from any crumbs or anything that could be falling from shelves above when I go to put these in my wine cooler for storage. I usually store these in the cooler section, the one that's 54 degrees Fahrenheit, but it doesn't really matter. You can even, when you get to this stage, lower it a little bit. At this point, for storage, you just want, I don't know, probably below 60 degrees Fahrenheit for storing bonbons. If I'm gifting or selling my bonbons, I usually package them in my favorite chocolate boxes, which I will link for you guys down below. These are the best non-custom chocolate boxes that I've been able to find that actually look professional. The reason why is they come with this little plastic insert which keeps them separate, and it's just like a nice presentation. The boxes look clean and nice. They don't look like oversized. I don't know. I just have a hard time finding nice boxes. If any of you guys have any good recommendations, comment them down below. I would love to hear them. These are a little expensive, but for me they're worth it because I like the nice look of them. Also at this point, if you're storing the bonbons or packaging them up to sell and you don't have a wine cooler, I actually do recommend keeping them in the fridge because it will extend shelf life, but you do still want to be aware of condensation and temperature change. So for example, if I'm selling these or gifting them and I don't have access to a wine cooler, I will put the chocolates in the box, wrap the whole box airtight with plastic wrap, and then store them in the fridge. When you pull them out, let the whole box come back to room temperature, and then take the plastic off. And that will kind of help you keep the shine and finish on the bonbons. And the reason is you're preventing moisture from getting into the box from the fridge, and then you're also not getting condensation onto the surface of the bonbon from the abrupt temperature change from the fridge to room temperature. And both of those things will ruin the finish of your bonbon and make them dull. And we don't want that. Well, that finishes off my full chocolate molding process. I hope that these steps were comprehensive and helpful for you guys. Let me know if you still have any questions for me in the comments and I will respond to you there. I also hope that you enjoyed the video and that you learned something new. If you did, please give the video a like and comment down below something that you didn't know before watching this video and something that you think will help you out next time you mold chocolates. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, today's the day. If you'd like to see something else that's sweet, just click on one of these thumbnails. Thanks so much for watching today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.